Picture this. You're walking down the aisle in your dream wedding dress. Everything is perfect, when suddenly your husband's ex-girlfriend bursts through the chapel doors screaming, "Check your phone!" What she sent me next made my blood run cold and had me dialing 911 before I even made it to the altar. This is the story of how my perfect wedding day turned into the most terrifying night of my life. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I should have known something was wrong when Derek's hands were shaking during our engagement photos. Not the cute, nervous kind of shaking that comes with proposal jitters, but the kind that makes someone spill coffee 3 times in one morning. But I was so caught up in wedding planning bliss that I brushed it off as pre-wedding stress. My name is Rachel Martinez, and 6 months ago, I thought I had found my happily ever after with Derek Sullivan. We met at a marketing conference in Phoenix 2 years prior, where he was presenting on digital advertising strategies, and I was there representing my graphic design firm. He had this confidence about him, this way of commanding a room that drew me in immediately. When he asked me to grab coffee after his presentation, I didn't hesitate. Derek was everything I thought I wanted in a partner: successful, charming, and seemingly devoted. He owned a thriving digital marketing company in Scottsdale, drove a Tesla, and had this penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the desert mountains. Our relationship moved fast, maybe too fast in retrospect, but it felt right at the time. Within 8 months, we were living together. Within a year and a half, he was down on one knee at South Mountain Park during a sunset hike, presenting me with a stunning 3-carat diamond ring. The proposal was everything I had dreamed of. He had hired a photographer to capture the moment from a distance, and afterward we celebrated with champagne and takeout from my favorite Italian restaurant back at his place. I called my sister Emma in tears of joy, barely able to get the words out. Derek seemed genuinely happy too, though looking back, there was something in his eyes that I couldn't quite place, a flicker of something that wasn't quite joy. Wedding planning consumed the next 6 months of our lives. I threw myself into every detail with the enthusiasm of someone who had been dreaming of their wedding day since childhood. We booked the Desert Ridge Chapel, a beautiful venue nestled in the foothills with stunning views of Camelback Mountain. The guest list grew to 150 people, including Derek's business associates, my college friends who had flown in from California, and both our families. Derek seemed supportive throughout the planning process, though he was often distracted. His phone was constantly buzzing with what he claimed were work emergencies. His marketing company was expanding, he explained, taking on bigger clients, requiring more of his attention. I understood. I had my own business to run, after all. But there were moments when I'd catch him staring at his phone with an expression I couldn't read, something between anxiety and guilt. 3 weeks before the wedding, Derek's behavior shifted noticeably. He became more irritable, snapping at me over small things like leaving dishes in the sink or forgetting to pick up his dry cleaning. He started working later, sometimes not coming home until well past midnight. When I asked about it, he'd get defensive, accusing me of not supporting his career ambitions. These weren't huge fights, but they left me feeling uneasy in a way I couldn't articulate. I confided in my maid of honor, my sister Emma, during one of our final dress fittings. She had flown in from Portland for the week leading up to the wedding, and I was grateful to have her support. Emma had always been protective of me, sometimes overly so, but her instincts about people were usually spot on. "Has Derek seemed different to you lately?" I asked her as the seamstress made final adjustments to my dress. The gown was everything I had envisioned: ivory silk with delicate lace details and a cathedral train that would look stunning against the desert backdrop. Emma studied my reflection in the 3-way mirror. Different how? I don't know. Distant, maybe? More stressed than usual. Pre-wedding jitters, she suggested, but I could tell she was paying closer attention now. Has he said anything specific? Not really, just work stuff. But his phone is constantly going off, and he gets this look. I trailed off, unable to explain the expression that had been bothering me. What kind of look? Like he's hiding something. Emma frowned. She had met Derek several times over the past 2 years and had always been polite but never enthusiastic about him. When I pressed her about it once, she said he seemed too smooth, whatever that meant. I had dismissed her concerns as sisterly overprotection. "Have you asked him directly?" she said. "I tried. He just says I'm being paranoid and that he's under a lot of pressure with the business expansion." The seamstress finished her work, and I stepped down from the platform, admiring how the dress transformed me. Despite my growing concerns about Derek's behavior, I still felt like a bride. This was supposed to be the happiest time of my life. 2 days before the wedding, Derek's phone rang during dinner at our favorite steakhouse in Old Town Scottsdale. We were having what was supposed to be a romantic pre-wedding date night, just the two of us, away from the chaos of final preparations. He glanced at the screen and immediately declined the call, but I caught a glimpse of the name, Vanessa. "Who's Vanessa?" I asked casually, cutting into my filet mignon. Derek's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Client, new account we're pitching next week." Something in his tone made me look up. He was avoiding eye contact, focusing intently on his steak. "She calls pretty late for business." "Different time zones," he said quickly. "She's based in New York." It was 8:30 in Phoenix, which would make it 11:30 in New York. Late for a business call, but not impossible. I let it slide, though the name stuck in my mind for reasons I couldn't explain. The next morning, Derek left early for his bachelor party, just a low-key afternoon of golf with his groomsmen followed by dinner. Nothing too wild, he assured me, since we both wanted to be fresh for the wedding. I spent the day with Emma and my bridesmaids, getting manicures and having a spa day at the resort where our out-of-town guests were staying. Derek didn't come home that night. He texted around midnight saying the guys had convinced him to stay at his best man's place, and he'd see me at the altar. It was traditional not to see each other the night before the wedding anyway, so I didn't think much of it. Emma raised an eyebrow when I told her, but she didn't comment. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and beautiful, with temperatures forecasted to reach a perfect 78 degrees by ceremony time. I woke up in the bridal suite at the Desert Ridge Resort, surrounded by my bridesmaids and the controlled chaos of getting ready. Hair and makeup artists transformed our suite into a salon, complete with curling irons, hairspray clouds, and champagne mimosas. I should have been purely happy, but that nagging feeling in my stomach had grown stronger overnight. Derek had sent me a good morning text, but it felt formal somehow, lacking the warmth and excitement I would have expected from a groom on his wedding day. When I mentioned it to Emma, she suggested he was probably just nervous and trying to play it cool. By noon, I was in my dress, veil perfectly arranged, makeup flawless. The photographer captured every moment, me stepping into the gown, Emma fastening the delicate buttons up my back, my mother tearing up as she saw me fully transformed into a bride. These should have been perfect memories, but I felt like I was watching it all happen to someone else. My phone buzzed with messages from Derek's groomsmen confirming they were ready, from the wedding coordinator updating me on timeline adjustments, from various family members who had arrived at the chapel, but nothing from Derek himself after that morning text. "He's probably just focused on getting ready," Emma said, noticing my repeated glances at my phone. "You know how guys are. They don't think about text updates like we do." The bridal party loaded into the decorated SUVs for the short drive to Desert Ridge Chapel. The venue looked even more stunning than I had imagined, with white roses and desert wildflowers adorning every surface, fairy lights twinkling in the late afternoon sun, and rows of white chairs arranged perfectly for our guests. I could see people milling around the chapel entrance, friends, family members, Derek's business associates in their suits. Everything was falling into place exactly as planned. The string quartet was set up and playing softly, the photographer was capturing candid shots of arriving guests, and the wedding coordinator was checking items off her list with military precision. But as we pulled up to the chapel, I noticed Derek's Tesla wasn't in the parking lot yet. The groom and groomsmen were supposed to arrive 30 minutes before the bridal party to handle final preparations and photos. My stomach clenched. "I'm sure they're just running a few minutes late," Emma said, though I could hear the concern creeping into her voice. The wedding coordinator, an efficient woman named Patricia, who had planned hundreds of weddings, approached our car with her clipboard and what looked like forced cheerfulness.
The groom's party is about 10 minutes out, she said through the window. Traffic on the 101 was heavier than expected, nothing to worry about. We waited in the air-conditioned SUV while Patricia coordinated with the chapel staff. I watched our guests chatting and laughing, completely unaware of any delay. My parents were greeting Derek's parents near the chapel entrance, my college roommates were taking selfies by the fountain, and Derek's business partner Marcus was checking his phone repeatedly, probably trying to reach Derek. 15 minutes passed, then 20. My carefully planned timeline was falling apart, and with it my composure. Emma held my hand while the other bridesmaids tried to distract me, but I could feel my anxiety building with each passing minute. Finally, Derek's black Tesla pulled into the parking lot, followed by two other cars carrying his groomsmen. I exhaled in relief, though my hands were still trembling slightly. Through the tinted windows of our SUV, I watched Derek emerge from his car. Even from a distance, I could see he looked rattled. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and he was moving with jerky, agitated motions that were completely unlike his normal composed demeanor. He looks stressed, my bridesmaid Jessica observed. Probably just running late, Emma said, but her tone suggested she was trying to convince herself as much as me.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Patricia approached Derek, and I could see them having what looked like an intense conversation. Derek kept running his hands through his hair and glancing around the parking lot like he was looking for someone or someone. His best man, his brother Connor, put a hand on Derek's shoulder in what appeared to be a calming gesture. After a few more minutes, Patricia returned to our SUV with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "All set now," she announced. "Just a small delay with the flowers for the groomsmen's boutonnieres. Everything's ready to proceed." The next 30 minutes passed in a blur of final photos, last-minute touch-ups, and coordinated chaos. I was positioned in the chapel's bridal suite, a small but elegant room adjacent to the main sanctuary, where I could hear the growing murmur of our 150 guests taking their seats. The string quartet had moved into the processional music rotation, and I could hear my favorite pieces floating through the walls. Emma helped me with final adjustments to my veil and train, while the other bridesmaids lined up in the hallway according to our rehearsed order. My father appeared in his tuxedo, looking handsome and emotional. He had been practicing walking me down the aisle without crying for weeks, with limited success. "You look absolutely radiant, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Derek is a lucky man." I smiled and squeezed his arm, though that persistent knot in my stomach hadn't loosened. Something still felt off, but I was committed now. Our guests were seated, the music was playing, and everyone was waiting for the bride to make her grand entrance. Patricia appeared in the doorway with her headset and clipboard. "Places, everyone, we're ready to begin." The bridesmaids began their procession, each one pausing at the chapel doors before making their way down the aisle to the altar where Derek and his groomsmen were waiting. I could hear the guests' appreciative murmurs and the photographer's camera clicking rapidly. Finally, it was my turn. Patricia signaled the string quartet, and the opening notes of Canon in D filled the chapel. My father offered me his arm, and we positioned ourselves at the entrance to the sanctuary. The chapel doors opened, and I saw Derek standing at the altar in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, hands clasped in front of him, looking impossibly handsome against the backdrop of desert flowers and twinkling lights. Our guests rose to their feet, turning to watch my entrance with smiles and phones raised to capture the moment. This was it, the moment I had been planning and dreaming about for months. My father and I began our slow, measured walk down the aisle, my cathedral train flowing behind me like something from a fairy tale. But as we made our way toward the altar, Derek's expression caught my attention. Instead of the joy and love I expected to see on my future husband's face, he looked almost panicked. His eyes kept darting toward the chapel entrance behind me, and there was a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead, despite the comfortable temperature. We were halfway down the aisle when I heard it, the sound of the chapel doors bursting open with a force that made several guests gasp and turn around. My father and I stopped walking, confused by the disruption. That's when I heard a woman's voice, clear and desperate, cutting through the sacred silence of our ceremony.
Rachel, don't do it. Check your phone right now. The woman standing in the chapel doorway was stunning in a way that made you immediately understand why men would lose their minds over her. Tall, with long auburn hair cascading over her shoulders, and wearing a form-fitting red dress that screamed confidence, she commanded attention from every person in the sanctuary. But it was her eyes that held me captive, wild, desperate, and fixed directly on me with an intensity that my skin crawled. Vanessa, get out of here! Derek's voice cracked from the altar, confirming what I had already suspected. This was the mysterious late-night caller, the client from New York who somehow knew exactly where our wedding was taking place. The chapel erupted in confused murmurs. My father's grip tightened on my arm protectively, while Emma stepped forward from her position at the altar, her bridesmaid bouquet forgotten as her protective instincts kicked in. Our guests were twisting in their seats, phones already coming out to record what was clearly about to be either the most dramatic wedding story they'd ever witnessed or the most expensive disaster. Rachel, Vanessa's voice carried across the chapel with startling clarity. I know this is crazy, but you need to see what I'm about to send you before you make the biggest mistake of your life. My phone, tucked safely in Emma's purse back at the altar, might as well have been on Mars for all the good it did me at that moment. But Vanessa was already pulling out her own device, fingers flying across the screen with practiced urgency. Security, Patricia whispered frantically into her headset, trying to manage a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond any wedding coordinator's nightmare scenarios.
Derek had left his position at the altar and was now striding down the aisle toward Vanessa, his face a mask of fury and panic. You need to leave, now. This is harassment. Harassment? Vanessa's laugh was sharp and bitter. That's rich coming from you, Derek. Tell her about last night. Tell her where you really were during your bachelor party. The words hit me like ice water. Last night, when Derek had texted that he was staying at Connor's place, when something in his message had felt off in a way I couldn't identify. Whatever this is about, I found my voice, though it sounded foreign to my own ears. Can we please handle it privately? There are 150 people here. These 150 people deserve to know what kind of man you're about to marry, Vanessa interrupted, her attention now fully focused on me. Check your phone, Rachel. I just sent you something that will change everything. Emma was already moving, reaching into her purse where she'd been keeping my phone during the ceremony. The chapel had fallen into an eerie silence, broken only by the soft rustle of fabric and the occasional whispered comment from our increasingly uncomfortable guests. Derek reached Vanessa just as Emma handed me my phone. Don't, he said, his voice low and threatening. Vanessa, I'm warning you. Warning me? Vanessa's eyes flashed dangerously. You lost the right to warn me about anything when you decided to… When I decided what? Derek grabbed her arm, and I could see his knuckles were white with tension. When did I decide to move on with my life? When I decided to marry someone who actually supports my career instead of trying to sabotage it? My phone buzzed in my hands, a text message from an unknown number, but I knew it had to be from Vanessa. My finger hovered over the message notification, and I became aware that everyone in the chapel was watching me. My parents, Derek's parents, our friends, our extended families, all waiting to see what would happen next. Rachel, don't. Derek's voice was pleading now, all pretense of anger stripped away. Whatever she sent you, it's not what it looks like. She's been stalking me for months, trying to break us up. Stalking you? Vanessa's voice rose to a near shout. I'm stalking you? You're the one who's been calling me at all hours, showing up at my apartment, begging me to… That's enough. Derek cut her off, but the damage was already done. The seed of doubt that had been growing in my mind for weeks was now a full-blown tree of suspicion. I opened the text message. The first thing I saw was a video thumbnail showing what looked like Derek's penthouse apartment. The timestamp showed yesterday evening, around the time his bachelor party was supposed to be winding down. My heart started racing as I pressed play. The video was clearly taken from inside Derek's apartment, and the quality suggests it was shot on a phone from someone hiding behind the kitchen island. I could see Derek on the couch, but he wasn't alone.
A woman was with him, and they were definitely not discussing business. But it wasn't just any woman, it was Vanessa, and they weren't just talking. My hands started shaking so violently I nearly dropped the phone. The video showed Derek and Vanessa in an intimate embrace, kissing with the passion of people who had clearly done this many times before. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what I could hear them saying. "Are you really going through with it tomorrow?" Vanessa's voice was clear through my phone speaker, and in the dead silence of the chapel, I realized others could hear it too. Derek's voice responded, "I have to. The business loan depends on it. Her father's investment is the only thing keeping us afloat. But after the honeymoon, after everything settles, we can figure out how to." I stopped the video, unable to listen to another word. The chapel was spinning around me, and I could hear my mother calling my name from somewhere that sounded very far away. Emma appeared at my side, steadying me as my knees threatened to give out. "That video is fake," Derek was saying desperately, still holding on to Vanessa's arm. "She's crazy, Rachel. She's been obsessed with me since we broke up. She probably hired someone to edit that footage." "Fake?" Vanessa laughed again, that same bitter sound that was quickly becoming the soundtrack to the complete destruction of my perfect wedding day. "Tell her about the loan application, Derek. Tell her how you listed her father's investment as collateral without mentioning that you're planning to divorce her within the year." The words hit me like physical blows. My father's investment? The $300,000 he had quietly transferred to Derek's business account last month to help with the expansion that Derek had been so stressed about. Money that was supposed to be a wedding gift and a vote of confidence in our future together. Is that true? My voice was barely a whisper, but somehow Derek heard me.
His face had gone completely white. "Rachel, you don't understand. The business was in trouble. I was trying to protect you from the stress. I never meant for any of this to happen." "Which part?" I asked, my voice growing stronger with each word. "The part where you've been cheating on me, or the part where you're using my father's money to fund your affair?" "It's not an affair," Derek said desperately. "Vanessa and I have history, yes, but—" "History?" Vanessa interrupted. "We've been seeing each other for 8 months, Derek. 8 months, since before you even proposed to her." The chapel erupted in gasps and murmurs. I could see Derek's mother covering her face with her hands, and his father looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. My own parents were making their way down the aisle toward me, their faces masks of concern and growing anger. "There's more," Vanessa continued, and I realized she was enjoying this. The revelation, the destruction, the complete chaos she had created, it was giving her some kind of satisfaction that made me understand she wasn't just here to save me from a bad marriage, she was here for revenge. "Show them the photos from your phone, Derek," she said sweetly. "The ones you took of us last week at the Ritz-Carlton when you told her you were in meetings all day." Derek's face had progressed from white to a sickly green color. "Vanessa, stop. This isn't helping anyone." "Oh, but it is helping," she replied. "It's helping Rachel avoid spending the rest of her life married to a lying, cheating fraud who's been using her family's money to pay for hotel rooms where he could sleep with his ex-girlfriend." I felt like I was watching this happen to someone else. The bride in the beautiful dress, standing in the middle of a chapel full of people, discovering that her entire relationship had been a lie. It couldn't be real. Things like this happened in movies, not to people like me. But then Emma's arm tightened around my shoulders, and my father appeared on my other side, his face thunderous with rage, and I knew it was all too real. "We're leaving," my father said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of authority that had built his successful construction company. "Now." "Dad, wait," I said, though I wasn't sure why. What was there to wait for? Evidence that Derek hadn't been lying to me for months? Proof that the man I had been about to marry wasn't exactly the fraud Vanessa was claiming he was? My phone buzzed again. Another message from Vanessa's number, this one containing what looked like screenshots of text messages. Even from a quick glance, I could see Derek's name at the top, and messages that were definitely not appropriate for a man who was supposed to be getting married the next day. The last screenshot was dated this morning, 2 hours before I had walked down the aisle. Derek had texted Vanessa, "After today, everything changes.
Give me 6 months to figure out the finances, then we can be together for real. The text message from this morning stared back at me from my phone screen like a neon sign advertising my own stupidity. While I had been getting my hair done and posing for photos, believing I was about to marry the love of my life, Derek had been texting another woman about their future together after he finished using me. 6 months, I said out loud, my voice cutting through the chapel's tense silence. You were planning to give it 6 months before you divorced me and took half of everything my family had invested in you? Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. For a man who made his living with words and presentations, he seemed to have lost the ability to form coherent sentences. That's not, Rachel, you're taking it out of context, he finally managed. I was just trying to get her to leave me alone. I was telling her what she wanted to hear so she'd stop harassing us. Harassing us? I laughed, and the sound was so bitter it surprised even me. Is that what you call the woman you've been sleeping with for 8 months? The woman you've been promising a future with while planning our wedding? Vanessa stepped closer, and I could see that beneath her confident exterior, she was shaking too. Whatever satisfaction she had gained from exposing Derek was being overshadowed by something else, something that looked almost like fear. There's something else you need to know, she said quietly, and the change in her tone made my blood run cold. The reason I had to stop this wedding wasn't just about Derek cheating. It's about what he's been doing with your father's money. My father, who had been standing protectively beside me, stepped forward. His face had progressed beyond anger into something much more dangerous. What about my money? Vanessa pulled out her phone again, scrolling through what looked like photographs of documents. Derek's been using Martinez Construction's investment for more than just business expansion. He's been laundering money through shell companies, taking cash payments for services that don't exist, and funneling the profits offshore. The words hit me like separate punches. Money laundering, shell companies, offshore accounts. These weren't just relationship betrayals, these were federal crimes.
Show me, my father demanded, his contractor's instincts taking over. He had built his business by being meticulous about finances and legal compliance. If what Vanessa was saying was true, Derek hadn't just stolen from us. He had potentially implicated my father's legitimate business in criminal activity. Vanessa handed her phone to my father, and I watched his face change as he scrolled through what appeared to be bank statements, wire transfer receipts, and incorporation documents for companies I had never heard of. This company, my father said, his voice deadly quiet, Pinnacle Marketing Solutions, that's not Derek's business. No, Vanessa confirmed. It's one of 3 shell companies Derek created using your investment as startup capital. The payments going in and out don't match any legitimate marketing services. I should know. I'm a forensic accountant. The pieces suddenly clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Vanessa wasn't just Derek's ex-girlfriend seeking revenge. She was a professional who had discovered criminal activity, and Derek's betrayal had given her the motivation to expose it. How long have you known? I asked her. 3 weeks, she admitted. I started getting suspicious when Derek kept asking me questions about financial reporting and audit procedures. When I dug deeper into the business records he thought I didn't have access to, I found the shell companies, the fabricated invoices, the offshore transfers. That's when I realized he wasn't just cheating on you, he was setting up your entire family to take the fall for his crimes. Derek had been backing away during this conversation, and I realized he was now positioning himself near the chapel's side exit. His groomsmen looked confused and uncomfortable, clearly having no idea what was happening. His brother Connor was staring at him with an expression of dawning horror. "You're insane," Derek said to Vanessa, but his voice lacked conviction. "These are legitimate business transactions. You're twisting everything to make it look criminal because you're jealous that I chose Rachel over you." "Then explain this," Vanessa said, pulling up another document on her phone. "This is a payment receipt for $75,000 from something called Desert Vista Consulting to Pinnacle Marketing Solutions. Want to know what Desert Vista Consulting actually is? It's a front for a drug distribution operation that was raided by the DEA last month." The chapel fell silent, except for the sound of my mother's sharp intake of breath. Drug money. Derek hadn't just cheating and stealing, he had been washing drug money through companies funded with my father's investment. I need to call the police, my father said, reaching for his phone. No, Derek's facade finally cracked completely. Dad, don't do that. You don't understand the whole situation. These people, the ones behind Desert Vista, they're not the kind of people you want to get involved with the authorities. These people? I stared at Derek as if I was seeing him for the first time. You're talking about drug dealers like they're your business partners. It's not what you think, Derek said desperately. I got in over my head. The marketing business was failing, and they approached me with what seemed like a legitimate opportunity to provide consulting services. I didn't know what they were really doing until it was too late to get out. Too late to get out? So you decided to drag my family down with you? My father's voice was getting louder, and several guests were now openly recording the confrontation on their phones. I was trying to protect everyone, Derek insisted. The wedding, the merger of our businesses, it was supposed to legitimize everything. Once we were married, once Martina's construction became part of the operation, it would have provided cover for... He stopped talking abruptly, realizing he had just confessed to exactly what Vanessa had accused him of. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of sirens in the distance. Patricia, the wedding coordinator, appeared at my elbow looking stricken. "Mrs. Martinez," she said quietly to my mother, "the chapel's security company automatically alerts local police when there's a disruption. They're probably responding to reports of the disruption." But as the sirens grew louder and closer, I realized they weren't just responding to a wedding disruption. Through the chapel's tall windows, I could see multiple police cars pulling into the parking lot, followed by what looked like unmarked federal vehicles. Vanessa followed my gaze and nodded grimly. "I didn't just come here to stop your wedding, Rachel. I came here to make sure Derek couldn't run before the authorities arrived. I've been working with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit for the past 2 weeks." Derek's face went from green to gray. "You're wearing a wire." "No," Vanessa said, pulling a small recording device from her purse. "But I have been recording everything you've said today, including your confession about knowingly laundering drug money and planning to use Rachel's family business as a front for criminal activity."
The chapel doors burst open again, but this time it wasn't a dramatic ex-girlfriend making an entrance. It was 6 federal agents wearing FBI windbreakers, followed by several uniformed police officers. "Derek Sullivan," the lead agent called out, his voice carrying easily across the chapel, "you're under arrest for money laundering, conspiracy to commit fraud, and racketeering." As they read Derek his rights and placed him in handcuffs, I stood frozen in the middle of the aisle in my wedding dress, surrounded by 150 guests who had come to celebrate what they thought would be the happiest day of my life. Emma appeared at my side again, gently taking my arm. "We need to get you out of this dress," she said softly. But I couldn't move. I was watching the man I had been about to promise my life to being led away in handcuffs, realizing that everything I thought I knew about him, about us, about my future, had been a carefully constructed lie. The FBI agent approached my father with a business card and a grave expression. "Mr. Martinez, we're going to need to speak with you about your business's financial relationship with the defendant. We have reason to believe you may be a victim of fraud, but we'll need to examine all transactions between your companies to determine the extent of the criminal activity." My father nodded numbly, the full implications starting to sink in. His business, his reputation, his life's work, all of it was now potentially compromised by Derek's crimes. As the law enforcement officers finished processing the scene and began clearing the chapel, I finally found my voice. "How long would I have been married to him before I found out the truth?" I asked Vanessa. She looked at me with something approaching sympathy. "Based on the timeline of the federal investigation, about 3 weeks. The indictments were already being prepared. Derek was going to be arrested whether I stopped this wedding or not." Which meant that if she hadn't shown up today, I would have spent my honeymoon married to a man who was about to be charged with federal crimes. I would have returned from our trip to find FBI agents searching our home and seizing our assets. Thank you, I said to Vanessa, and meant it. She nodded and started to leave, then turned back. For what it's worth, Rachel, I don't think you were ever really in danger from him. Derek's not violent, he's just weak and greedy. But the people he was working with, they're a different story. You're safer with him in custody. As she walked away, leaving me standing in the ruins of what was supposed to be my perfect wedding, I realized she was right. Derek hadn't just betrayed me, he had potentially put my entire family in danger from people who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate witnesses or loose ends. The question now was, what other secrets was Derek still hiding? The FBI agent who approached us after Derek was taken away introduced himself as Special Agent Michael Chen. He had kind eyes that seemed almost apologetic as he explained that our chapel had just become a crime scene and that we would all need to provide statements before anyone could leave. I understand this is incredibly traumatic, Agent Chen said, addressing me directly. We'll try to make this process as quick and painless as possible, but we need to document everything that happened here today, especially the statements Mr. Sullivan made during the confrontation. I nodded numbly, still processing the fact that I was talking to an FBI agent while wearing a wedding dress that now felt like a costume from someone else's life. Around us, our wedding guests were being organized into groups by other agents, their phones being collected as potential evidence of Derek's confession. Emma had found a chair and guided me into it, lifting my heavy train so it wouldn't drag on the floor. My mother appeared with a bottle of water and a concerned expression that I recognized from my childhood. The look she got when I was sick, and she was trying to determine how worried she should be. "Honey," she said softly, "do you want to change clothes before you talk to the agents? Emma brought your regular clothes in case you wanted to change before the reception." The reception? I had completely forgotten about the elaborate dinner and dance we had planned at the Desert Ridge Resort, the same resort where 75 out-of-town guests were staying, where a 5-course meal was being prepared, where a DJ was probably setting up equipment for a celebration that would never happen. "Patricia," I called to the wedding coordinator, who was standing nearby looking shell-shocked. "The reception. We need to cancel everything." "Already handled," she said quickly. "I called the resort as soon as the FBI arrived. They're contacting all the vendors and guests. Under the circumstances, there won't be any cancellation fees." Agent Chen pulled out a small recording device. "Miss Martinez, I know this is overwhelming, but I need to ask you some questions about your relationship with Derek Sullivan and what you might have known about his business activities." Over the next hour, I found myself recounting the past 2 years of my life to a federal agent, searching through my memories for signs I had missed, clues I had ignored, red flags I had dismissed as pre-rubbing jitters. Agent Chen was patient and thorough, asking follow-up questions about Derek's work schedule, his travel, his financial behavior, and his associates. "Did you ever meet anyone connected to his business who seemed unusual or made you uncomfortable?" Agent Chen asked. I thought back through the various company parties and networking events Derek had taken me to. Most of his clients and partners had seemed like typical business people, polished, professional, focused on deals and profits. "There was one man," I said slowly, the memory surfacing as I spoke. "At Derek's office Christmas party last year, Derek introduced him as a client, but something about him felt off. He was too intense, and he kept asking personal questions about my family's business. Do you remember his name? Vincent something. Vincent Torres, maybe? He had this way of looking at you like he was calculating your worth." Agent Chen made a note. "Vincent Torres is one of the principals behind Desert Vista Consulting, the front company Miss Blake mentioned. Did Derek ever bring him to your home or introduce him to your family?" My blood chilled. "He came to our engagement party. Derek said he was an important client, and it would be good for business if we included him. He spent a lot of time talking to my father about construction projects and asking about Martinez Construction's capacity for large jobs." "What kind of large jobs?" "Commercial developments, warehouses, distribution centers. At the time, I thought Derek was just trying to network and find new opportunities for both our businesses to work together." Agent Chen's expression grew more serious. "Ms. Martinez, It's possible that Derek was setting up your father's company to be used for money laundering on a much larger scale than we initially suspected. Vincent Torres and his associates specialize in using legitimate construction companies to hide drug money through fake building projects and inflated contracts. The full scope of Derek's betrayal was still revealing itself, like layers of an onion being peeled away to expose something rotten at the core. He hadn't just been planning to use my father's investment, he had been planning to use my father's entire business as a cover for criminal activity. My father, who had been speaking with another agent nearby, rejoined our conversation looking grim. They want to examine all of Martinez Construction's financial records going back 2 years, he said. They need to trace every interaction we've had with Derek's companies to determine what's legitimate and what's not. How bad is it, Dad? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Bad, he admitted. The $300,000 investment was just the beginning. Derek had been proposing a merger between his marketing company and our construction business. If that had gone through, if we had become business partners officially, he trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks. Our family business, built over 30 years of honest work, would have become a front for drug money. Agent Chen looked between us sympathetically. The good news is that as victims of fraud, Martinez Construction shouldn't face criminal charges. However, there will likely be civil asset forfeiture proceedings to recover any funds that can be traced to criminal activity. You'll need to get a good attorney who specializes in white-collar crime. Emma, who had been quietly listening to everything, suddenly spoke up. What about Derek's other victims? If he was doing this to Rachel's family, he was probably doing it to other people too. That's exactly what we're investigating, Agent Chen confirmed. Derek Sullivan appears to have been targeting successful small business owners throughout Arizona, using romantic relationships and business partnerships to gain access to their finances. You're the 4th case we've uncovered in the past 6 months. The 4th case. There were other women, other families who had been manipulated and used by Derek just like we had. The thought made me feel simultaneously less alone and more horrified by the scope of his deception. Can I ask you something? I said to Agent Chen. How long has Vanessa been working with you? Miss Blake contacted us 3 weeks ago when she discovered the financial irregularities. Initially, we thought she might be involved in the scheme, but her cooperation and expertise have been crucial to building our case. She's actually the one who identified the pattern of Derek targeting women with successful family businesses. So she really is a forensic accountant. One of the best. She works for a private firm that specializes in tracking financial crimes. Her personal relationship with Derek gave her access to information that we never would have been able to obtain through normal investigative channels. A new thought occurred to me. If Derek was arrested today, does that mean the people he was working with, Torres and the others, know that their operation has been exposed? Agent Chen's expression darkened. That's actually something we need to discuss. While we believe Derek was primarily motivated by greed rather than loyalty to Torres's organization, there's a possibility that his associates might view him as a liability now that he's been arrested. There's also a possibility they might view you and your family as loose ends.
Loose ends? My mother's voice was sharp with alarm. Are you saying we're in danger? As a precaution, we're recommending that your family avoid predictable routines for the next few weeks while we round up the other members of Torres's organization. Don't go to the same places at the same times, vary your routes to work, be aware of anyone who might be watching your house or business. The surreal nature of the situation hit me again. 2 hours ago, I had been a bride getting ready to start my new life. Now I was a witness in a federal criminal case, potentially in danger from drug dealers, and facing the possibility that my family's business might be destroyed by the man I had trusted with my future. There's something else, Agent Chen continued. We recovered Derek's phone when we arrested him, and there are some messages that suggest Torres's people weren't entirely happy with Derek's decision to get married. Apparently, they viewed your relationship as a security risk. What kind of security risk? According to the messages, Torres was concerned that having a wife would make Derek less controllable and more likely to cooperate with authorities if he was ever caught.
There were discussions about whether Derek should be encouraged to call off the wedding. The implications were chilling. Not only had Derek been lying to me about everything, but his criminal associates had apparently been discussing whether I was a problem that needed to be solved. Emma grabbed my hand. "Oh my God, Rachel, what if they had decided you were too much of a risk? What if they had tried to—" "We don't think it ever got to that point," Agent Chen said quickly, "but it does underscore why Miss Blake's intervention today was so important. By forcing Derek's arrest in a public setting, she ensured that Torres's organization couldn't deal with the situation quietly." I looked around the chapel, which was now nearly empty, except for FBI agents collecting evidence and a few of our closest family members waiting to give their statements. The flowers were still beautiful, the decorations were still perfect, but the space felt tainted now by everything that had happened. "What happens next?" I asked. "Derek will be arraigned on Monday. Given the nature of the charges and his flight risk, he'll likely be held without bail. We'll continue building our case against Torres and his associates, and unfortunately, you'll probably be called to testify when this goes to trial." Testify? In federal court? Against the man I had almost married and the criminals he had been working with? The thought of having to relive this humiliation and betrayal in front of a jury was almost as overwhelming as everything else that had happened. But as I sat there in my wedding dress, surrounded by the debris of my shattered life, I realized I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. Relief that Vanessa had been brave enough to stop the wedding. Relief that the truth had come out before I had legally tied myself to Derek's crimes. Relief that whatever happened next, at least I would face it with my eyes open instead of living a lie. The question was, what other truths were still waiting to be revealed? 3 days after my wedding that never was, I sat in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house, staring at boxes of returned wedding gifts that kept arriving despite our attempts to contact all the guests. Each delivery was a fresh reminder of how public my humiliation had become. The story had made local news, then national news, and now my destroyed wedding was being used as a cautionary tale on social media platforms I didn't even use. Elma knocked on my door, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the concerned expression that had become her default setting since Saturday. "The FBI agent is here," she said softly. "Agent Chen wants to update you on the investigation." I pulled on a sweatshirt and followed her downstairs, where Agent Chen was sitting at our kitchen table with my parents. The formal dining room where Derek and I had planned our wedding menu just weeks earlier now felt too intimate for law enforcement discussions, so the kitchen had become our unofficial FBI briefing room. "Miss Martinez," Agent Chen greeted me, with the same professional kindness he had shown at the chapel. "I have some updates I thought you'd want to hear directly from me rather than through the media." The media coverage had been relentless. Phoenix news stations had picked up the story first, focusing on the dramatic wedding interruption angle. But once details about the money laundering scheme became public, national outlets had started calling it the criminal wedding crash and the FBI bride. I had stopped reading articles about myself after the 3rd one referred to me as the naive fiancé who nearly married a drug money launderer. "We've made significant progress in the past 72 hours, Agent Chen continued. Vincent Torres and 4 associates were arrested yesterday in coordinated raids across Phoenix and Tucson. We recovered over $2 million in cash, weapons, and documents that detail the full scope of their operation." My father leaned forward. "What does this mean for Martina's construction?" "The good news is that Torres's records confirm what we suspected. Derek was still in the recruitment phase with your business. The merger hadn't been finalized, so your company's exposure is limited to the $300,000 investment and some preliminary planning documents. We should be able to recover most of your funds through asset forfeiture." Relief flooded my father's face for the first time since Saturday. His business was his life's work, and the possibility of losing it had been eating away at him.
"There's more," Agent Chen said. "Derek's cooperation since his arrest has been extensive. He's provided detailed information about Torres's entire network in exchange for a plea agreement that will likely reduce his sentence significantly." "How significantly?" I asked, though I wasn't sure why it mattered to me. Whether Derek spent 5 years or 50 years in prison wouldn't change what he had done to my family.
Probably 8 to 10 years instead of 25 to life. He'll also have to make full restitution to all his victims and forfeit all assets purchased with criminal proceeds. 8 to 10 years? Derek would be out while I was still in my 30s, free to find new victims and start over somewhere else. The thought made me feel sick. But here's the part you really need to know, Agent Chen continued, his tone becoming more serious. Derek's debriefing revealed information that directly concerns your safety. Torres wasn't just worried about Derek getting married, he was specifically concerned about you. Me? Why would a drug dealer care about me personally? Agent Chen pulled out a tablet and showed me what appeared to be surveillance photos. Pictures of me leaving my graphic design office, pictures of me at the grocery store, pictures of me meeting Emma for lunch. The photos were time-stamped from the past 2 months. Torres had Derek's fiancée investigated as part of his standard security protocols. What they found was a successful businesswoman with strong family connections, no criminal background, and the kind of moral compass that would make her likely to contact authorities if she discovered criminal activity. The photos made my skin crawl. While I had been blissfully planning centerpieces and choosing appetizers, drug dealers had been watching me, analyzing me, determining whether I posed a threat to their operation. Torres concluded that you were a liability, Agent Chen continued. According to Derek's statement, Torres had given him an ultimatum: call off the wedding or they would handle the problem themselves. Handle the problem, I repeated slowly. Meaning me? Derek claims he refused and told them he would find another way to manage the situation. But phone records showed Torres's people were planning to approach you directly the week after your honeymoon. Emma grabbed my hand under the table. How do you approach her? Agent Chen's expression was grim. Torres's standard practice for dealing with problematic civilians was to start with intimidation, threatening phone calls, vandalism, following family members. If that didn't work, they escalated to physical threats. In at least 3 documented cases over the past 2 years, people who posed security risks to their operation disappeared. The kitchen fell silent, except for the sound of my mother's sharp intake of breath. I stared at the surveillance photos, realizing how close I had come to becoming not just the victim of financial fraud, but potentially something much worse. So Vanessa stopped the wedding, my father began. Saved your daughter's life, Agent Chen finished. By forcing Derek's arrest in a public setting before the wedding could take place, she eliminated the need for Torres to take action against Rachel directly. The full scope of what could have happened was starting to sink in. If Vanessa hadn't shown up at the chapel, I would have married Derek, gone on our honeymoon to Cabo, and returned to find myself targeted by a criminal organization that viewed me as a threat to their operation. Derek knew this? I asked. He knew they were planning to threaten me? According to his statement, yes. He claims he was trying to find a way to protect you while maintaining his relationship with Torres. His plan was to convince you to move away after the wedding. He had been researching marketing opportunities in other states, supposedly for business expansion. Another layer of betrayal. Derek hadn't just been using in my family. He had been planning to uproot my entire life to hide his crimes, potentially putting me in danger in the process. There's one more thing, Agent Chen said. We found evidence that Derek wasn't Torres's only asset in the Phoenix area. There are at least 2 other individuals in similar situations, people who got involved with Torres's organization through romantic relationships or business partnerships and are now trapped. Other victims like me? We believe so. One is a real estate developer whose girlfriend introduced him to Torres's associates for what appeared to be legitimate investment opportunities. The other is a restaurant owner whose boyfriend convinced her to allow cash-heavy businesses to use her establishments for events and meetings. The pattern was becoming clear. Torres and his associates were sophisticated criminals who used personal relationships to infiltrate legitimate businesses and communities. Derek hadn't been a mastermind. He was a tool, just like the other people they had recruited. But unlike the other victims, I had been saved by Derek's ex-girlfriend's conscience and professional expertise. I want to testify, I said suddenly. When this goes to trial, I want to testify against all of them. Agent Chen nodded approvingly. Your testimony will be crucial. especially since you can speak to Derek's deception and the impact on your family's business. But I should warn you, defense attorneys will try to portray you as a scorned bride seeking revenge rather than a legitimate victim of criminal fraud.
Let them try, I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. Derek stole from my family, lied to me for months, and put my life in danger. Torres and his people were willing to hurt innocent civilians to protect their drug operation. I'm not going to stay quiet and let them get away with it just because it's embarrassing. My mother squeezed my shoulder proudly. That's my daughter. Agent Chen gathered his materials and prepared to leave. The trial won't start for several months. These cases take time to prepare properly. In the meantime, Torres's network has been largely dismantled, so the immediate threat to your safety has been eliminated. But I'd still recommend being cautious about your daily routines for the next few weeks. After he left, I sat with my family in the kitchen, processing everything we had learned. The man I had loved, trusted, and almost married had not only betrayed me, but had potentially signed my death warrant with criminals who viewed me as an obstacle to their illegal operation. But I was alive, my family was safe, and the people who had threatened us were in custody. For the first time since Saturday, I felt something other than humiliation and heartbreak. I felt angry, and that anger was going to fuel whatever came next. Emma looked at me with concern. How are you feeling about all this? I thought about the question carefully. 3 days ago, I would have said I was devastated, embarrassed, and broken. But sitting there with the full truth finally revealed, I realized those feelings were being replaced by something else. I feel like I dodged a bullet, I said finally. Literally. My father reached across the table and took my hand. We all did, sweetheart. We all did. But even as relief settled over our family, I couldn't shake the feeling that there were still secrets waiting to be uncovered. Derek's cooperation with the FBI had been extensive, but he was also a proven liar who had spent months deceiving everyone around him. What else hadn't he told them? 2 weeks after the arrests, I received an unexpected visitor at my temporary office space downtown. I had moved my graphic design business out of the home office I had shared with Derek, unable to work in a space that held so many memories of our fabricated life together. The new office was smaller and less convenient, but it felt clean in a way that Derek's penthouse never would again. Vanessa Blake stood in my doorway holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing the same uncertain expression I had seen on her face the day she destroyed my wedding to save my life. I know this is weird, she said without preamble, but I was hoping we could talk. Not about the case. The FBI lawyers have made it clear we shouldn't discuss our testimonies with each other, but about everything else. I gestured for her to come in, accepting the coffee she offered. We sat across from each other in the small seating area I had set up for client meetings, 2 women whose lives had been irrevocably tangled by one man's criminal stupidity. "How are you holding up?" Vanessa asked, and I could hear genuine concern in her voice. "Better than I expected," I answered honestly. "Anger helps. It's easier to be furious than heartbreaking." She nodded understandingly. "I've been angry for months, ever since I figured out what Derek was really doing with his businesses and why he kept asking me technical questions about financial audits." "Can I ask you something?" I said. "How long were you really together? Derek told me you dated for 6 months 2 years ago, but the FBI said you'd been seeing him for 8 months while he was engaged to me." Vanessa's laugh was bitter. "We were together for almost 2 years, on and off. Derek had a talent for making women feel like they were the only one, while simultaneously maintaining multiple relationships. I thought I was his girlfriend. You thought you were his fiancé. There was probably a third woman somewhere who thought she was his business partner with benefits." The scope of Derek's deception kept expanding every time I learned something new. "Did you know about me the whole time?" "Not at first. Derek told me he was single when we reconnected last year. I only found out about your engagement when I saw the announcement in the Phoenix Business Journal.
Derek's photo was in an article about successful young entrepreneurs, and the caption mentioned his upcoming marriage to Rachel Martinez of Martinez Design Studios. I remembered that article. Derek had been so proud of the coverage, calling it a major milestone for his career. He had framed it and hung it in his office, where Vanessa had apparently seen it and realized she was the other woman. That must have been devastating, I said.
It was, but what made it worse was that Derek didn't deny it when I confronted him. Instead, he spun this story about how his engagement was essentially a business arrangement, that he needed to marry into a successful family to legitimize his company for bigger clients. He convinced me that he was planning to end the marriage after a few years and that we could be together openly once his business was stable. The same lie he had been texting her on our wedding morning. Derek had perfected the art of telling each woman exactly what she needed to hear to keep her invested in his deception. "When did you realize it was more than just cheating?" I asked. "About a month ago, when Derek started asking increasingly specific questions about forensic accounting procedures. He wanted to know how investigators trace money through shell companies, how they identify patterns in financial transactions, what kind of documentation would be needed to prove criminal intent. At first, I thought maybe he was worried about a client's legal troubles, but the questions were too detailed and too personal." "So you investigated him?" "I ran a routine background check first, the kind I do for all my romantic relationships, after some bad experiences in college. That's when I found the shell companies and the suspicious transaction patterns. Once I started digging deeper, the whole criminal enterprise became clear." Vanessa pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots of what appeared to be text message conversations. "These are some of the messages Derek sent me while you were planning your wedding. Look at the dates." The messages were from the past 3 months, spanning the period when Derek and I had been finalizing wedding details, and I had been blissfully unaware of his double life. The text showed Derek complaining about wedding stress, asking Vanessa to be patient with his complicated situation, and promising that everything would change after he was married and had access to my family's business resources. He was using our wedding planning as a cover story for why he was so busy and distracted, I said, reading through the messages. Every time I asked why he seemed stressed or distant, he blamed it on work pressure. But he was actually stressed about maintaining relationships with both of us while planning crimes. "The worst part was how convincing he was," Vanessa said. "Even when I started suspecting criminal activity, part of me still believed his story about the engagement being a business arrangement. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only person who truly understood him." I knew exactly what she meant. Derek's charm had been his most dangerous weapon, allowing him to manipulate multiple people simultaneously while making each of us feel special and chosen. "Why did you decide to work with the FBI instead of just leaving?" "Because I realized that if I just walked away, Derek would find other victims. The pattern was too clear. He specifically targeted successful women with family businesses and financial resources. You weren't going to be his last victim, Rachel. You were just going to be his biggest one." The weight of that statement settled over me. If Derek had succeeded in marrying me and gaining access to Martinez Construction's resources, he could have expanded his money laundering operation significantly. My family's 30-year reputation in the Phoenix construction industry would have provided perfect cover for increasingly large-scale criminal activities. "Agent Chen told me there were other victims," I said. "Other people Torres's organization was targeting through romantic relationships." Vanessa nodded grimly. "3 that we've identified so far, but there are probably more. These criminals are sophisticated. They study their targets carefully and develop long-term plans for infiltrating legitimate businesses. Derek wasn't just randomly cheating and stealing. He was part of a calculated strategy to corrupt established companies throughout Arizona." "Do you think Derek was always working with them, or did they recruit him after his business started failing?" "Based on the financial records I analyzed for the FBI, Derek's marketing company was legitimate for the first year and a half. The criminal connections started about 8 months ago, right around the time he proposed to you. I think Torres's people approached him when they identified his business as a potential front, and Derek saw partnership with them as a solution to his financial problems. 8 months ago. Derek had proposed to me as part of a criminal conspiracy, not out of love or genuine desire to build a life together.
Our entire engagement had been a calculated move in a money laundering scheme. I keep wondering if there were signs I missed, I admitted. Red flags I ignored because I wanted to believe in our relationship. Derek was a professional manipulator, Vanessa said firmly. He fooled me, and I'm trained to detect financial fraud. He fooled your father, who's been successfully running a business for 30 decades. He even fooled some of Torres's associates, who thought he was more valuable than he actually was. You can't blame yourself for believing someone who made lying and deception his full-time job.
We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, two women processing the shared trauma of having been deceived by the same criminal. Despite the bizarre circumstances that had brought us together, I found myself grateful for Vanessa's presence. She was the only person who truly understood what it felt like to discover that someone you loved had been systematically lying to you while committing federal crimes. "Can I ask you something personal?" Vanessa said eventually. "Do you think you'll ever be able to trust someone again, romantically, I mean?" I considered the question carefully. I don't know. Right now, the idea of dating anyone feels impossible. But I also don't want Derek's crimes to ruin my entire future. What about you? "I've been in therapy since I contacted the FBI," she said. "My therapist says it's normal to have trust issues after being victimized by someone with antisocial personality disorder. Apparently, people like Derek are so skilled at manipulation that even mental health professionals can be fooled by them." Derek has antisocial personality disorder? That's what the FBI's psychological profiler concluded after interviewing him. It explains his ability to maintain multiple deceptive relationships without apparent guilt or empathy. He genuinely doesn't understand why what he did was wrong, beyond the fact that he got caught. The clinical explanation was somehow both comforting and disturbing. It meant Derek's betrayal wasn't personal. He was incapable of genuine emotional connections with anyone. But it also meant that nothing about our relationship had been real from his perspective. "There's something else you should know," Vanessa said, her tone becoming more serious. "Derek's been trying to contact both of us from jail. He's written letters, tried to make phone calls, even asked his lawyer to arrange meetings. Agent Chen advised me to refuse all contact, and I think you should too. What could he possibly want to say to us now?" According to his lawyer, Derek wants to apologize and explain his actions. But Agent Chen thinks he's actually trying to coordinate our testimonies or find ways to undermine the prosecution's case. Derek may be in jail, but he's still trying to manipulate the situation. The thought of Derek attempting to control the narrative, even from behind bars, was infuriating but not surprising. He had spent months manipulating everyone around him. Why would imprisonment change his fundamental nature? "I won't meet with him," I said firmly. "But I am going to face him in court when I testify. I want him to see what his crimes did to real people." Vanessa smiled for the first time since entering my office. "I'm looking forward to my testimony too. Derek thought he was so much smarter than everyone else. It's going to be satisfying to watch a jury hold him accountable for his crimes." As she prepared to leave, Vanessa turned back with one final thought. "You know, in a weird way, Derek did us both a favor. We're stronger now than we were before we met him, and we're free to build authentic lives instead of living in his web of lies." She was right. The woman who had walked down that chapel aisle 2 weeks ago had been naive and trusting to a fault. The woman sitting in this office today was wiser, more cautious, and infinitely more aware of her own strength. Derek had tried to destroy my life to cover his crimes. Instead, he had accidentally shown me who I really was when everything I thought I knew was stripped away. And that person was someone I was proud to be. 8 months after my wedding day turned into a federal crime scene, I stood outside the United States District Court in Phoenix, adjusting my navy blazer and trying to calm the butterflies in my stomach. Today was the day I would finally face Derek Sullivan in court and tell a jury exactly what his criminal conspiracy had cost my family and me.
The media attention had died down significantly since the initial arrests, but a few reporters were still camped outside the courthouse, hoping for dramatic footage of the FBI bride, a nickname I had learned to tolerate, though I much preferred being called a key witness for the prosecution. Agent Chen met me at the courthouse steps, looking professional in his dark suit and carrying the briefcase that I knew contained evidence that would help put Derek and his associates away for a very long time. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "I've been ready for months," I replied, and meant it. The scared, confused woman who had stood in that chapel 8 months ago had been replaced by someone who understood exactly what she was fighting for. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected from watching legal dramas on television, but it felt appropriately serious for the magnitude of the crimes being prosecuted. Derek sat at the defendant's table wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, looking pale and much thinner than he had on our wedding day. He glanced at me briefly when I entered the courtroom, but I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no lingering attraction to the man I had once planned to spend my life with.
Vincent Torres and his associates occupied a separate defendant's table, their expensive suits a stark contrast to Derek's jail attire. Torres himself was a compact man in his 50s, with calculating eyes that seemed to be assessing everyone in the courtroom for potential weaknesses. Even facing life in prison, he radiated the kind of cold confidence that explained how he had built a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. The prosecution's case had been building for months, and I was just one of dozens of witnesses who would testify to the scope and impact of Torres's money laundering operation. But according to the prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Rodriguez, my testimony would be particularly important because it demonstrated how Torres's organization infiltrated legitimate businesses through personal relationships. When my name was called, I walked to the witness stand with steady steps, raised my right hand, and swore to tell the truth about everything Derek Sullivan and Vincent Torres had put my family through. As I settled into the witness chair and looked out at the packed courtroom, I felt a sense of purpose I had never experienced before. Attorney Rodriguez began with basic questions about my background, my relationship with Derek, and the timeline of our engagement. The defense attorneys watched carefully, no doubt looking for inconsistencies they could exploit during cross-examination. But I had been preparing for this moment for months, reviewing FBI files and working with prosecutors to ensure my testimony was accurate and complete. "Miss Martinez," Attorney Rodriguez said, "please tell the jury about the morning of your wedding day. What was your emotional state as you prepared for what you believed would be the happiest day of your life?" I described the excitement, the nervousness, the absolute certainty that I was marrying a man who loved me and wanted to build an honest life together. Several jurors nodded sympathetically, and I could see them beginning to understand how completely Derek had deceived me. "When did you first realize that Derek Sullivan had been lying to you about fundamental aspects of his life and business?" "When his ex-girlfriend Vanessa Blake interrupted our wedding ceremony and showed me video evidence of Derek's infidelity and criminal activities," I answered clearly. Until that moment, I believed Derek was a legitimate businessman who was occasionally stressed about work. I had no idea he was laundering money for drug dealers or using my father's investment to fund criminal activities. The questioning continued for over an hour, covering Derek's suspicious behavior during our engagement, the fake business proposals he had used to gain access to Martinez Construction's finances, and the terror I had felt when I learned that Torres's organization had been surveilling me and planning to eliminate me as a security threat. When Attorney Rodriguez asked me to describe the impact Derek's crimes had on my family, I felt my carefully controlled emotions threaten to overwhelm me for the first time. "Derek didn't just steal money from us," I said, my voice growing stronger as I continued. "He stole our sense of security, our ability to trust people, and nearly destroyed a business my father spent 30 years building. But more than that, he put our entire family in physical danger from violent criminals who viewed us as obstacles to their illegal operation." I looked directly at Derek as I spoke and saw him flinch slightly. For the first time since his arrest, he seemed to be grappling with the human consequences of his actions rather than just the legal ramifications.
The cross-examination was more challenging, as defense attorneys tried to portray me as a vindictive ex-fiancé seeking revenge rather than a legitimate victim of criminal fraud. Derek's lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman named Patricia Wells, suggested that I had suspected Derek's criminal activities but chose to ignore them because I was benefiting financially from our relationship. "Isn't it true, Miss Martinez, that you enjoyed the expensive lifestyle Mr. Sullivan provided?" she asked. "The penthouse apartment, the luxury vacations, the 3-carat engagement ring that cost more than most people's annual salary?" "Derek told me he was a successful entrepreneur," I replied calmly. I had no reason to believe the money he spent came from criminal activities rather than legitimate business profits. When I learned the truth, I immediately returned the engagement ring to the FBI as evidence and moved out of the apartment that had been purchased with drug money. The defense attorney tried several more angles, but my months of preparation with the prosecution team had prepared me for every strategy they might use to undermine my credibility. By the time I stepped down from the witness stand, I felt confident that the jury understood I had been a victim of Derek's crimes, not a willing participant. Vanessa's testimony came 2 days later, and it was devastating for the defense. As a forensic accountant, she was able to explain the technical aspects of Derek's money laundering scheme in terms the jury could understand. Her detailed analysis of financial records, combined with her personal knowledge of Derek's deceptive behavior, painted a picture of a sophisticated criminal conspiracy that had targeted multiple families throughout Arizona. But the most powerful moment came when she described her decision to contact the FBI and ultimately interrupt our wedding.
I realized that if I stayed silent, Rachel Martinez would unknowingly marry a criminal who was planning to use her family's business as a front for drug money, Vanessa testified. I couldn't let that happen to an innocent woman, even though exposing Derek's crimes would also expose my own humiliation at being deceived by him. The trial lasted 3 weeks, with dozens of witnesses testifying about Torres's criminal empire and Derek's role in expanding the money laundering operation. FBI agents presented evidence of cash transactions, shell company formations, and communications between Torres's associates discussing the elimination of security threats, including me. When the verdicts came in, Torres and his top associates were found guilty on all counts, including racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. Derek was convicted of money laundering and fraud charges, but acquitted of the more serious racketeering counts, thanks to his cooperation with the FBI investigation. At sentencing 2 months later, I was given the opportunity to address the court before Derek learned his fate. I had spent weeks writing and rewriting my victim impact statement, trying to find words that adequately expressed what his crimes had cost my family. "Your Honor," I began, standing at the podium facing the judge while Derek sat just 20 feet away. Derek Sullivan didn't just commit financial crimes against my family. He weaponized trust, love, and intimacy to destroy people's lives. He convinced me to love a person who never existed while using that fake love to gain access to my family's resources and put us all in danger from violent criminals. I paused, looking directly at Derek for the first time during the sentencing hearing. But what Derek didn't realize is that his crimes also revealed my own strength. I survived his betrayal, helped put him and his criminal associates in prison, and built a new life that's more authentic than anything I had when I was living his lies. Derek received a sentence of 12 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after serving 8 years. Torres was sentenced to life without parole, while his associates received sentences ranging from 15 to 30 years. As I left the courthouse for the final time, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. The scared bride who had discovered her fiancé's criminal life in front of 150 wedding guests was gone, replaced by a woman who understood her own resilience and worth. 6 months later, I received a letter forwarded through the FBI from Derek in federal prison. Agent Chen had advised me not to read it, but curiosity won out. The letter was 3 pages of self-serving explanations and requests for forgiveness, with no real acknowledgement of the damage his actions had caused. I threw the letter away without finishing it and went back to work on a new project,
a nonprofit organization I had founded to help other victims of romance fraud and financial crimes. Because Vanessa had been right, Derek hadn't been unique. There were thousands of people like him out there, using love and trust as weapons to destroy innocent families. But there were also survivors like me, ready to fight back and help others avoid the trap I had almost fallen into. The woman who had walked down that chapel aisle planning to say "I do" to a criminal would never have imagined she could build something meaningful from such devastating betrayal. But sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can also become the foundation for the most important work of your life. And that's a lesson worth more than any 3-carat diamond ring purchased with drug money. My name is Rachel Martinez. I survived a criminal conspiracy disguised as a love story, and I'm stronger now than I ever was when I believed in fairy tales. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.